everyone, I'm Bob Wormsley from INSYDIUM, and the new Cycles 4D Early Access release is out. And this, coupled with the previous release, means we have a ton of new features, including CryptoMatte support. Not only that, the RealTime Preview is way faster, and the node editor has been rebuilt from the ground up to make it faster and a smoother experience to work with. So let's jump in and find out what's new. The Cycles 4D Real-Time Preview gives you a high-quality render which updates as you make changes in your viewport. As you can see, we have this scene with 9 planes and they are being displaced at render time to create these stunning surfaces. More on this technique later. As you can see, as I orbit this scene, it updates and cleans up incredibly quickly, giving us a really good idea and representation of what our final material and render will look like on output. If you look at the bamboo material here, this is the node structure, and this is using 4 6K image textures to create this look, driving the diffuse, the specular, the displacement, and the roughness. And as you can see, that is loaded in fine, and it is updating and cleaning up incredibly quickly. If we jump back into our scene camera, you'll see that the real-time preview supports depth of field effect. So if we just make a shallower depth of field here, you can see that we have got this in focus strip and everything else has been blurred out. And as this samples kick through, this cleans up and gets better and better. The Cycles 4D Real-Time Preview has been completely rewritten and reworked for this early access update. It is now smoother and better to work with than ever before. The Cycles 4D node editor has been completely rebuilt and redesigned to make it more functional, easier to use, and probably most importantly, incredibly fast. So let's have a look at this node structure for one of our fizzy pop can materials. I'm just going to go into full screen mode so we can see what's going on. So if I zoom into our principled BSDF node, here's the new look. So each setting has its own slider bar, which works very smoothly, changing that amount. If you want to put in a precise number, you could double click in this area and put in your desired amount. Should you prefer or you want to keyframe these amounts, we can go to Options, Show Attributes, which brings up an Attributes Manager. And again, you can make adjustments here, which will be respected in the node. And then you can keyframe any of these amounts should you wish. Let's just hide that manager. If you double click on any node, it will collapse and it automatically hides all of the inputs and outputs which aren't in use. So let's just demonstrate. We'll take this texture coordinate node and let's just fill up some of these inputs just with random outputs. So now if I collapse it, those 3 inputs are revealed because they're in use and the rest are hidden. Let's just get rid of that. Some of the nodes that aren't this default width have a special collapsing feature. Let's go to the vector menu and bring in a mapping node, which is very wide. If we collapse this, once we've done the settings, you'll see that it is automatically resized to be the same default width as every other node. This makes your tree organization much easier. So let's just get rid of that mapping. So at the moment, you are seeing the connections between nodes are the new small tangents. And these are kind of small tangents on Bezier curves. And effectively what you're getting is a linear connection with a small curve into a horizontal in and out. So you can just go with a linear connection should you prefer. There is the old Bezier connection, which gives you these nice curves. But the new small tangents connection is excellent for really organizing your node tree to make it as readable as possible. It's particularly good when using pivots to help with that organization. So let's finally have a look at the overall speed. So with this few nodes, you wouldn't expect any node editor to struggle or to lag. But once you start building up node trees, this can happen. So let's just make a bit of room, and I'm going to control drag and copy a load of these nodes. So with this many nodes, some node editors would already start to struggle and maybe lag and slow down a bit. But you can see the new Cycles 4D node editor is perfectly smooth with this amount, and every single one of these nodes still has its own functionality, and we haven't got any performance problems at all. So let's make it work a little bit harder. We'll copy all of those, and let's copy again. And again, we haven't really got any lag or slowdown. Each one is working really nicely, and we've got that functionality. Let's just do one more. Select all of those, copy again. And now some node editors with this amount of nodes really would begin to struggle, but the Cycles 4D node editor is absolutely robust, and we haven't got any lag problems whatsoever, and we're maintaining all of this usability with this interface. So that is the new Cycles 4D node editor, completely rebuilt and redesigned, and it is faster and more powerful than ever. Cycles 4D now supports CryptoMatte, which means you can export masses of highly accurate mattes for compositing. So in this scene we have this really nice gearbox model, and it is quite an intricate model. If we open up the tree, we can see it's made up of lots and lots of different sub-objects. So there are all kinds of items here which comprise this gearbox. So an incredibly complex model, and if you're wanting to export various different mattes for different parts of this, it would be a very lengthy and laborious process. So that's where CryptoMatte comes in. So how do we do it? Let's go to the render settings. First of all, we need multipass selected and post effects selected. Then in our Cycles 4D settings, let's go to Render Elements, and we're going to select Object in the CryptoMatte menu. Then let's just put this on CUDA. So now in the Save menu, all we're going to do is save the multipass into a desired folder, and we can hit render. We're going to make it a multi-layer file. So now if I hit render, it's going to render to picture viewer, and once this has chugged through, we will then open up the resulting renders in After Effects so we can demonstrate the power of CryptoMatte. So here we are in After Effects. Let's open up what was rendered. So you get 2 files per frame. You get the Gearbox EXR, which is your RGB, and you also get a CryptoMatte layer. So let's just import those into our project. And now what we can do is let's make a new sequence with our RGB image, and there it is, looking very nice. And I'm just going to duplicate that, so we've got 2. So now let's bring in our CryptoMatte layer, and we'll put that at the top, and it is completely black, but this contains very important data. To view it, what we need to do is go to Effect, and we need to go to the 3D channel and bring in a CryptoMatte, which will appear here as a choice once you've installed it. So now you can see immediately we are getting a choice of colours per object within our gearbox. So to make mattes out of this, all we need to do is go to the layer and select the object layer. This is what we selected in our Cycles 4D preferences, and hit OK. And now what I'm able to do is just click on these colours, and it makes a matte per colour. So let's just hide that for a second. Let's just say what area do we want to isolate here? Let's take these red components here. I'm not even going to pretend to know what this component is called. I won't embarrass myself, but that's what we want, those red bits. So if we make a selection of those, excellent. Now to use this as a matte, what we need to do is not view all of these colors. So to do that, we go to the output and change it from colors to matte only. And there is our new matte. So then all we need to do to use this as a matte is to set our track matte for one of our Gearbox EXR layers to Luma Matte. If I just disable the other Gearbox EXR, you can see there we have perfectly matted out our spring components. So let's just demonstrate that further. Let's say we want to change the color of only those components. Let's go to Effect, Color Correction, and we'll try, what can we use? We could use a toner for this. Let's get the midtones and let's make this really obvious. Let's make them kind of like a really bright cyan color. So that we have our cyan springs. Let's activate the original plate. And there we can see that we've been able to make a very specific color correction just to that one component. And should you wish, you can make adjustments to your matte. If you hold Shift, you can add further elements. And if you hold Alt, you're able to then remove some of those elements. Let's remove that one. So let's put this back to matte only. Make the matte invisible, and now we have managed to color these components in our gearbox that cyan color. So that is the basics of CryptoMatte support in Cycles 4D. Hugely powerful compositing tools. Cycles 4D now has an inbuilt HDR browser. To get started, all you need to do is go to the Preferences menu in Cinema 4D, and in the Cycles 4D preferences, it asks for where you keep your HDRI images. If you select a folder that contains those various libraries, that's it set up. Now you need to go to the Cycles menu and bring in an environment object. When you do this, it brings in an environment object, and an HDR from your library is automatically added to that background material. And now we have this being lit by the HDR. If you want to choose it, all you need to do is go to the environment object, to the HDR tab, and open the HDRI browser. Here, you're able to cycle through the various different HDRs until you get one that you like. You can see all of the collections within your folder here. Let's try these nature ones and see how these affect your model. If you don't want the HDRI to be seen in the background, you just want it to light your scene, all you need to do is go to the environment object, to the object tab, and disable ray visibility camera. And now the HDR is just lighting the scene and is not seen in the background. Finally, if you open the HDR browser, you will see that you will automatically get 10 complementary INSYDIUM HDR studios. So that is the new HDR browser in Cycles 4D. Rendering hair has never been so easy. Now we have the principled hair shader. So in this scene, we have a Cinema 4D hair object, which is generating 25,000 strands. It also has a Cinema 4D hair texture tag on, which is controlling some of the dimensions like the thickness. But on top of that, we have a Cycles 4D material tag, which is where we're getting this really nice render. And it is fully compatible and supports the functions of both the hair object and the hair material in Cinema 4D, which gives you huge amounts of control. So let's just reduce the amount of strands we have here to make this scene a little bit more manageable in real time. So we'll take it down to 2,500 hairs. Now if I hit play, obviously this is going to re-render and it's going to be far thinner because we have fewer strands. So let's make those individual strands a little bit more thick now that we have fewer of them. So to do that, all we need to do is open the Cinema 4D hair material, and let's just thicken them up slightly. So we'll just take out those 2 zeros. So now each individual strand is much thicker and we're getting this render. So let's look at the Cycles 4D hair material, and we have this new principal hair node, and you can do everything within this one node. The first thing to look at is how you color your hairs. So by default, you can use direct coloring, and that means that any color value that you put in this box will be applied to the hair in question. Let's go punk rock. Probably the most useful and the one you'll use the most is the coloring mode melanin concentration, which is far more physically accurate. So what this is doing, it is saying how much melanin is in the hair itself. If we put the melanin amount down to 0, the hair will be white or grey. And then the more melanin you add to the hair, we go through the hair color spectrum from white to blonde to brown, and then finally all the way to a black color at the end. We've also got melanin redness, which helps you get those more ginger auburn and strawberry blonde looks. And then on top of that, you are able to further add a tint to those colours. So let's just add a little bit of a tint to see if we can redden this up ever so slightly. Add a bit more saturation. And now we're getting a slightly more red, ginger, kind of autumnal colour. We also have some really useful features down here as well. We have various roughnesses. We have coat, which gives you a kind of specularity across the entire hair. And we have two incredibly useful random selectors. We have random colour and random roughness, which is applied per strand. So if I increase the random colour to full, you will see that each strand is given a colour somewhere within this melanin value. So some of them are more white and some of them are verging on the black end of that melanin colour scale. The final colouring mode is the absorption coefficient, which is an incredibly realistic mode. You're able to dial in really precisely exactly what colours that you want, but you're probably going to need some accurate data sets to be able to dial this in to get that look that you're specifically after. So that's it. Very fast rendering and very fast to set up hair simulations using the principled hair node in the new Cycles 4D. The new Displacement Node allows you to make amazing micro poly displacement scenes quickly and easily. As you can see in the viewport here, we have 3 regular planes, and in the renderer we can see amazingly detailed and accurate micro poly displacement, which obviously is happening at render time. Here we have a fantastic granite texture. We have this realistic looking bamboo, and then we have this kind of micro city look that you've come to expect. So this is very fast to render, very fast to set up, intuitive and quick. Let's have a look at the new Displacement Node. In this scene we have a sphere and it is being coloured via this noise texture, which is being piped into the colour input of this diffuse node. So let's sort out some displacement. We'll right click, go to the vector menu and bring in the new displacement node. And here it is. And all this needs is a black and white image to drive the height. So let's just borrow this noise texture because that's a black and white image from the factor. We'll put that into the height. And I'll pipe that displacement into the displacement input. And then straight away, we've got some really nice looking micro poly displacement. We can make adjustments to that noise. Let's just distort it slightly and we'll get more kind of ridges. Bring the scale down and a bit of distortion. And we're getting some really interesting looking ridges coming into this. We can increase the scale of that displacement, which obviously is going to make it displace more fiercely. And we get this incredibly pointy, kind of random looking displacement, and bring that back down. And then you have a mid-level adjustment, and this just says, where does that displacement start on the black to white scale? So at 0.5, it means that black is going to displace inwards and white is going to be pushed outwards. If we put it down to 0, black will do nothing, and then every other grey going up to white will push outwards. And then inversely, if we have this set to 1, it means that white won't displace at all, and then as the greys get nearer to black, they will push inward more. So we'll just keep that at 0.5. And of course this, any height map can be used, any black and white image can be used to drive this height, and those height maps can be animated for amazing effects. Let's have a look at an example. So here we have a torus, and this is being displaced using an animated displacement map by mixing various different black and white images together. And as you can see, you can get some pretty stunning and detailed looks from a mere torus. There's no change to the geometry here at all. And this is using the new Displacement Node. There is a new vector displacement node in Cycles 4D, which is far more versatile than the standard displacement technique. The standard version uses black and white maps to move object vertices and displace them along their surface normals. But this means you're not able to get these overhanging areas of models. It just can't work. But vector displacement can step up to the plate and do this. So in this scene, we have this model which I've just extruded from a plane in the sculpting tools in Cinema 4D. And if I just cycle through these various layers, you'll see there are the layers of the object. So we have this rudimentary mushroom. So let's just hide that from view. So you're able to export from the sculpting tools a vector displacement map. So if I put that in a material on this plane, you'll see how it looks. So that's what a vector displacement map looks like, and it uses RGB color values to enable you to displace the object vertices in a way that doesn't have to stick with the surface normals. So if we then apply this same map to the vector displacement node and apply it to a new plane, when they have loaded in, we're able to get from a plane an incredibly displaced mushroom, which is using these RGB values to determine where these object vertices are displaced. And we're getting this amazing overhang, which, as I said earlier, would not be possible using a standard technique. So that is the new vector displacement node in Cycles 4D. There's a new subsurface scattering mode, which is far more physically accurate. Here in this scene we have our model, and this is using the old Christensen-Burley subsurface scattering in a principled shader. If we change this to the new random walk, we're going to get true volume scattering of that light. And as you can see, the result is a far more realistic subsurface scattering. We've got a great variation in tonal values depending on the thickness of that volume and how the light is scattering inside of it. Let's just bring in another model so we can compare these two. So in the foreground here we have the old model of subsurface scattering, and we have our new random walk on this model here. And as you can see them side by side, the old way is still pretty good, but random walk gives us this fantastic realistic scattering of that light. It's even more obvious if we switch off these two lights and just light these two models from behind. You will see that in the new random walk mode, we're kind of maintaining and retaining all of this really nice detail in the creases in this toga, whereas in the old way, it still looks pretty decent, but you're losing that detail. So that is the new random walk subsurface scattering mode. It can be used in the principled BSDF shader and also in the old subsurface scattering node, and it will be available as an option there as well. The motion blur has been reworked to be faster to process and render. It also works very well with cached particles. So in this scene we have these X particles which are being moved around by a turbulence. Let's just try a render and see what we get. So we have a little bit of depth of field enabled here. We've got some particles going out of focus, but obviously they're moving very quickly and we don't have any motion blur. So let's go to the render settings and activate motion blur. And now we're getting these fantastic trails from these particles. If we go to the camera tag, here's where we control those settings. So let's just increase the shutter time, which means that we're going to get much bigger trails, and they look really good already. And we can orbit around those and it'll update. And we're getting those fantastic motion blur effects right here in the real-time preview. The principled volume shader makes working with exposure effects much faster and easier. In this scene we have 3 emitters and they are emitting these coloured smoke. We've got green, blue and red particles passing on that colour information to exposure effects. And so to render this and get what looks like a very complex smoke render in our viewport, all we need are these 3 nodes. So we have the principled volume node, which is driving this, and there's a couple of elements. We've got our point density texture, which is referencing our exposure FX object, and we are sending the color of that to the principled volume color channel, and we're sending the density and we're putting it through a math multiply node to thicken that up, and then we're able to get these smokes. And if we just scrub through our simulation to a point where those smoke elements are mixing, you'll see that we're getting realistic color mixing where the red is joining the blue. We're starting to turn it into a purple, and we're getting a much more kind of cyan color from the green and the blue. And this is working really well with 3 very simple nodes. The principled volume node is also excellent for rendering realistic fire quickly. So let's go to our scene, and we're going to change this somewhat. So instead of this being a colorful smoke, we'll put the smoke channel to Exposure FX Smoke, which is going to give us a much more regular smoke look. And now what we want to do is get the fire information. So to do that, we need to copy our point density node. Let's just minimize this one and minimize our multiply. So here's our new point density texture. Let's set this to be Exposure FX Burn. And then if I preview the density channel, you'll see here is the burn information. These are those flames. So what we will do is a couple of things. We will pipe this density into the emission strength. And now we have some emission, but it is white. So let's change this color from the emission color from white to, let's just give it a fiery orange, and now we've got this orange amount. We can also use the black body model to get more realistic coloring, especially as the temperature increases. So let's pipe this same density value into the black body intensity. And now as we raise the temperature slider, you'll see that this gets stronger and stronger to the point where it's burning white hot. And then you can add an additional tint with this black body tint section here. So that is very fast and easy to set up smoke and fire simulation renders using the new principled volume node. The Bevel node allows you to add bevels to geometry at render time. In this scene, we have this nice Russian model aeroplane engine, and if we just move in a little closer to it, we can see that it's looking pretty good and pretty realistic. We have this shader on here, which basically, if we just zoom in the node editor, it's applying a series of mixed noise textures into the roughness of a glossy node, and that's giving us this really nice shiny metal, but with a bit of a kind of a mottled roughness to give it that added realism. What is spoiling this render are the perfect 90-degree angles on these cooling fins, and this isn't good. Now if we just hit ND to reveal the lines of the model, we'll see that this looks like it's probably been imported from another application, and that the topology is pretty horrific. And if you were going to try to bevel this in a modeling way, it would be nigh on impossible. But with the new Bevel node, we can do that at render time. So all we need to do is take a input bevel, and we need to pipe the output of this bevel into the normal of our glossy shader. Now at first, this isn't going to work. It's become lighter, and that is because our radius amount is way too much. It's trying to create a bevel that is bigger than the model itself, so obviously it can't do it. So all we need to do is put this down to say, let's try 0.005. And there you can see straight away that we have a bevel, but it looks a little blurry and we've lost a little detail. And that's because we don't have enough samples. So let's just take that sample amount and put it up to, say, 60 samples. And now we have a fantastic, clean bevel rendering incredibly quickly. And it means we don't have to worry about modeling headaches with this model. The new Ambient Occlusion node gives great versatility in making custom textures for specific effects. In this scene we have this statue of David, and in the texture we've got applied there are two basic principled shaders. One is giving this porcelain look and the other is a very shiny gold plate look. So once you apply an ambient occlusion node, you obviously get the map that you would imagine, with the darker areas where the shadows would fall and the lighter areas where there is no self-shadowing. So what we're able to do with this is use this map to drive the mixture between the gold and the porcelain material. So if we take the output of that, which is driven through a gamma node for a bit more contrast, the result is a mix between those two principled shaders. We have the porcelain look over the majority of the model with this really interesting gold leaf effect where the ambient occlusion shadowing lies. The instance tag now supports rotation. Let's have a look at this scene. We have this landscape object which is spawning particles dependent on its slope, and we are using an instance tag with a low poly tree to spawn these instances in those particle positions. So it looks okay, but the problem is if we go to the top view, we can see that the clones are perfectly aligned. We want these instances to have some variation. So we can add a little bit of size variation. We could do that before and that'll change it somewhat, but now we're able to add rotation, offset and variation. So in the heading, let's put 360 degrees offset, which nothing looks any different because they've just rotated by 360 degrees in unison. But if we put 100% variation, then we're going to get random values between 0 and 360 per particle. And now we've got these instances that look far more varied. So that is the new rotation, offset and variation in the instance tag. Another new feature enables you to help with variation, and this is a option in the particle info node. So I'm just going to open up my Cycles 4D material that I've used to texture this scene, and you can see that it is just a few nodes. We've got the brown bark material and the green leaf material. And what we want to do is add some randomization to this green color so not all of the trees are the same. So the way we can do that is if we go to the input menu and pick a particle info node, there is a new random output. So if I just isolate this output, we'll see what happens. It applies a random value to each particle, which is very useful. So all we need to do is bring in a, let's bring in a color ramp, and we're going to color it various different shades of green. So we'll start with a very dark green, and we'll change this white knot to a much more kind of yellowy green, something like that. And now what we can do is pipe this random amount into the factor, and now this gradient is giving us different green colors. So if we then pipe this color output into the green color diffuse, now we have got that randomization that we wanted in the color as well, and that is using the new particle info random output. Cycles 4D now supports IES lighting maps to make your renders far more realistic. So in this scene we have these 3 scene lights which aren't casting any realistic light patterns on this wall whatsoever. So what we need to do is create a light material. So here in my node editor I have a lighting material, and we're able to bring in an IES texture. Within this node, we can load up any IES material that you have downloaded, and it will load it as a light map. Now what we can do is go to the Cycles 4D lighting tag and drag in our light material. This will then use the IES light map to cast this fantastically realistic lighting pattern down the wall. We can of course change the colour of this in real time should we wish to whatever we want, and you're able to change the strength of that cast light with the strength slider within the IES texture. You can of course have multiple textures in any one scene, so let's just activate these two further lights, casting realistic light patterns which really make those architectural renders pop. So as you can see, amazing improvements and new features to Cycles 4D. This early access release is available to anyone with an active maintenance, so for all of that information and how to get hold of it, just go to the INSYDIUM website. Don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube, and I'll see you next time.